My name is Shannon O'Hurley, and my pronouns are she, her, and this is the day that love has made. Yes. So in addition to the estimated 7 million or more Americans, 7 million or more Americans who attended the No Kings rally yesterday, I want to give a shout out to our international siblings from all over the world who showed up at demonstrations, small and large, in solidarity, supporting us and supporting the ideals of democracy from Canada, Costa Rica, France, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Malawi, Mexico, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. John, would you put up a few pictures we have from yesterday? We've got a couple here. He's just gonna show. Yeah. Rev Sally, I see you. Yeah. So it was a day of absolute joy. My favorite part, I mean, there was lots of things, but my favorite part was seeing the families who brought their kiddos. Wow, the power in that, the power in that. But you know, here is what struck me the most when I sat down last night to really consider and think, you know, of all the things as I marched along, what was the thing that kept coming to me? And as I marched along yesterday with so many of you beloveds, I kept having this thought that the same spirit that moves through all of us and our international family that is gathering in solidarity, that very same spirit of love, of what is true, moves through also every system, every organization, every corporation, and every government. And it is so easy to forget that. We see corruption or injustice, and we understandably start to believe that somehow the divine has disappeared from those systems, organizations, corporations, and governments. And I get that. I have felt that too. Yet even in those moments of what we have come to understand of calculated shock and awe here in this country, the truth, the spiritual truth, is that divinity can never be erased, but it can be forgotten. In certain systems, it has clearly been forgotten. And of course, there have been governments and regimes built entirely on that forgetting, born from fear, domination, and separation rather than love. And yet, even then, hear me and hear how I say this, please. The spark of the divine remains often hidden beneath the struggle and the rubble, waiting to be remembered. Waiting to be remembered. Divinity, spirit, love is always there, waiting to be remembered. That remembering is what brings healing both individually and in nations. When we remember our divine nature, healing begins. When we remember our divine nature, the path of possibility is lit before us. When we remember our divine nature, that is when we come to the realization that, for example, perhaps, maybe, that particular relationship in our life is no longer serving us. Or that career that we chose so far back is no longer holding our interest. Or we begin to create and develop new things and new ways of being in the world. When we remember our divine nature, the ways in which we used to judge ourselves and, dare I say, judge others, we do less harshly because we remember that divinity is underneath all of it. and we soften. And the same is true on a larger scale. When a people, a community, or even a nation remembers our divine nature like we did yesterday, a shift towards true healing begins. Consider with me for a moment that every system on earth was originally built by human hands and human hearts, means that every system on earth still carries the energetic at its core, the imprint of the divinity, the potentiality, the infinite potentiality, the truth. But it may have been forgotten or buried under generations of fear, greed, individualism, or egoic power. It doesn't mean it's not there. Just as we can remember our divinity, so can systems and nations. Because transformation does not begin out there, we teach. Transformation begins here within us. And so those of us who are in the spiritual practice of remembering, we're serving the healing of these systems. Do you see? We saw that yesterday. And we are called to help awaken those still caught in the slumber of fear. We are called to continue past the march yesterday, to continue holding that energetic, that light high until they too remember. Until they too remember. Yesterday, we saw that remembering in action across the world, we together as a collective remembered by the millions. We remembered by the millions our divinity, who we truly are, and the kind of world we have come here to co-create. Are you with me? Yes. And so as more and more of us are waking up and remembering this truth, that it is everywhere, even places that it is hidden, we can and will fearlessly transform together in the name of the same love that woke us up this day, the systems and organizations and corporations and governments that so dearly and deeply are calling for it. Truth, equity, harmony, and peace is the way of spirit. It is the way of us. It is the way of organizations, and it is the way of this world. A metaphysical teaching that is the crux of our new thought understanding here is that everything is created twice. First in mind or thought, and then out into the world. So it follows then that the true collective transformation cannot begin out there. Do you see? It begins with the thought within us. It begins here. The challenge is that in some iterations of our teaching, it stops there. We do not follow that. We do not subscribe to that. We understand that in order to create the world for all people, we start with ourselves and we carry that out. We carry that out. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Rabbi Joshua Abraham Heschel, who said, "When I marched in Selma, my feet were praying. When we marched yesterday, our feet were praying, my loves." Our feet were praying. So let's make this personal, shall we? I invite you to look at something in your own life that has been healed in your lifetime. Think about it. Think about it. This could be something like a dynamic, maybe within a family structure or a friend circle. It could be an addiction that has finally been generationally healed. It could be a codependent behavior, a self-worth issue, financial adversity, or a toxic agreement of silence that once kept something secret but has since been lovingly and courageously brought to the light. Look within your own lifetime for a moment here. Maybe it's something you've witnessed in another family structure, but you've witnessed it. A generational healing of something that required the person or people involved to remember their own divinity, their own divine power, their capacity for unconditional love, and they shifted something. They had a new thought about something. They swapped one thing out for another. And the thing they swapped out was the false belief, and what they brought back in was the divine truth, if we're looking at it through the spiritual lens, do you see? So when we bring forth what is within us, we change the trajectory of our own story. When we swap out the crapola for truth, we change our story, and not only do we change our story, we change the story of every generation to follow us. And I dare say, the ancestors applaud. I speak from personal experience. So I've shared from here before, both Shelley and I, Rev Shelley and I, got the call to ministry, to serve in some way when we were small girls, children. I was, in my very first communion, I was raised Catholic. For those of you who know what that is, it's a seminal event. And I can remember distinctly, I remember the dress I wore, I remember just the barrette I had in my hair. I mean, I remember that day was so important to me because it represented the belonging. And I remember sitting in that church, St. Ignatius, and I remember sitting there, and I remember, actually, no, that one was St. John's. St. Ignatius was in a second. Hold on. St. John's, this is a long time ago. St. John's. And I remember sitting there and looking up, and for those of you who grew up Catholic, or maybe if you grew up in any sort of Christian tradition that was conservative, we had the crucifix of Jesus on the cross with, the nails in his wrists and his feet and the blood. And I remember being a little girl and being horrified, terrified by it. It was very horrific. And so I would have to do a lot of mental gymnastics. But even despite the mental gymnastics that I faced when I would walk into a church, I loved it. I loved everything about it. I would sit and I would stare at the stained glass, and I would feel something I didn't yet have words for. What I understand now, it was my connection with the divine. But I didn't know what that was back then. So for me back then, I thought that was First Communion. And so I remember having my First Communion, and afterwards out on the sidewalk, a bunch of very well-meaning adults said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A priest." And they laughed, because that's funny. And to a 7-year-old little girl, that was the very first time in my life I learned that I was not allowed to be on that particular team or have a seat at that particular table, simply because I was a girl. But I still loved it. I was confused by it. The nuns in the tradition that I was raised in were very much in the background. I didn't really see them very much. So there was no place for me. And then I remember being in the 4th grade, and I wanted to be an altar girl, and I went to my dad, who is the best guy on the planet. So I went to him and I said, "Well, why can all the boys in my class be an altar boy and I can't be an altar girl?" Because to me, the idea of wearing the robes and serving mass, just being close to whatever that thing was that I wanted to feel. And I thought being an altar girl was the way that I would do that. And I said to my dad, "But they're not letting me sign up." And my dad said, "Let me make a few calls." So I have to tell you, I would say my father, Bob Hurley, hi Dad, is a living hero to me and my 5 siblings. If we were to describe him in one word, it would be integrity. My father was a feminist. My father also took the first vows to become a priest. And I remember seeing the picture of him in his cassock. And I was like, I love that. That is so great. But my dad wanted to have a family, and he was far too progressive. And he, to this day, maintains that that was the hardest decision. Leaving the priesthood was the hardest decision for him. But he and I have always shared that connection with the ineffable. And so my dad knew who to call, and he contacted the bishop, finally, of the diocese and said to him, if my son wants to be an altar boy, that's great. What do you suggest I tell my daughter? And the bishop said, tell her she can be an altar girl. So, but wait. So technically, I was myself and my best friend Lonnie. Hi, Lonnie. We were the very first altar girls on the West Coast in the United States, the first. But here's the deal. Those were early days. Now it's commonplace, it's wonderful. And now, even progressive Catholic communities, they have non-binary kiddos. It's great, is as it should be. But back then, it was different. And I remember the day came and I was gonna serve Mass and I was so excited. I mean, like, I can't even begin to tell you. Christmas times 10. And there I was in that outfit and the whole thing. And we got to the most important part of the Mass where the priest holds up the bread that represents the body of the Christ, which, by the way, has its roots completely in paganism, which is probably why I loved it in the first place, but that's another talk. So there I am, and I'm holding the gold plate, and I remember my hands were trembling because I was just going to hold the host, and I was so excited to be part of this. And Father Monahan, I don't know, it's like he remembered in that moment that we were girls, and he turned to me, and he said, you can't be here for this part. Go sit down in the pew. It was devastating. And I literally was like, what do you mean? And he yelled, go sit down in the front pew. Shame is exactly what it was. And Lonnie and I remember my face was so hot, and I was so angry, and I was so confused, and I had shame that I didn't know why I had it. What was that? And I remember sitting in the front pew looking up. There was Father Monahan saying Mass by himself. I'd never seen that before. He'd rather say it by himself than have two girls up there serve. And I looked at that, and I was looking at the crucifix, and I knew there was something more. And in my anger and in my rage and in my confusion, I remember thinking to myself, this is wrong. And then I stopped, and I went, and I'm gonna show you. Because love always wins. The thing that I want to share with you here and why I'm sharing this very personal journey for me is you can imagine the healing and the forgiveness work it took me to get to this place. You can imagine years of my life of forgiveness work. Because, the journey didn't stop there in the Catholic Church, it went on. I graduated and, the whole thing. Lots to heal and sort through and unlearn. That little 7-year-old girl, that little 9-year-old girl didn't know that the roots of Christianity were based in a matriarchal teaching because women could give life in the pagan tradition. The little 7-year-old in me and the 9-year-old in me did not know that Constantine, who had been a pagan, decided in his authoritarian mind that he wanted to eradicate all of the wisdom of the indigenous peoples. He wanted to erase the wisdom of the women and turn them into witches, which he did. And all of the voices of the early Gnostic teachings of the women were completely erased. It wasn't until we found the Nag Hammadi manuscripts that we found gospels like the Gospel of Thomas and, oh my God, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The first time I read that, I sobbed. I didn't know that Mary Magdalene had been referred to as the greatest teacher of the disciples. I had to learn all of that, and I had to reclaim that so that I could stand in my full power as a spiritual teacher. And so let me tell you, I found myself, after years and decades of healing all of this authoritarian pain, I found myself in the tiny little town of Assisi in Italy just a few weeks ago. And after going to multiple churches a day throughout the country, and chapels and cathedrals, and lighting candles and praying and meditating, and always doing the mental gymnastics when I would walk in there. I even saw, I went to a mass in Italian and a mass in English, and it was beautiful. I was like, oh, this is so great. I can absolutely take what works for me and gently lay down what does not. I've healed that. Whoa, good for me. And then I walk into this tiny, tiny, tiny little church that used to be a temple for Minerva, a female goddess. And the wisdom of the people in that town honored her and built a temple, a church above the temple. And what they did was glorious, and it changed me. I walked into that church, getting ready to light my candle, and I looked up. And for the first time in my entire life, I did not see a crucifix with Jesus. I saw a gigantic image of Mother Mary. And I immediately started weeping. I mean, I had to sit down. I had never seen the divine feminine in a Catholic church like that. Mary is often to the side. Mary Magdalene, we don't really talk about her. Here was Mother Mary. I literally sobbed, and I thought about my 7-year-old little girl, and I thought about my 9-year-old little girl, and I thought how my life would have been so different if there had been equanimity represented in the church of my childhood. Can you imagine how that would have changed our entire world? So that stayed with me. That image has stayed with me. And it was that moment right there in that tiny town in Italy, that I recognized that equanimity itself had been intentionally buried under the rubble. But it was always there patiently waiting all along. And I was reminded in that moment through my tears that truth, spiritual truth, never disappears. It gets forgotten, it gets buried, but it never disappears. We are standing for that divine equanimity to be reborn in this life. Do you see? Yes, because divine equanimity is for all of us. It is for immigrants. Divine equanimity is for people of color. Divine equanimity is for the LGBTQIA plus people. Divine equanimity is for those of us who are differently abled, neurodiverse, and those who navigate chronic illness. Divine equanimity is our birthright, and it is our providence. And it's that remembering is what brings healing both to us individually and to our nations. And yesterday while I was marching, I thought about that tiny little church in Assisi, and I thought about divine representation being discovered again, and I felt it on the streets of Portland. We had all woken up, truly woken up to what is possible for all people, all genders, all cultures, and all nations. When we remember our divine nature, healing begins. When we remember our divine nature, the path of possibility is lit before us. My talk today is called "The Day the Altar Changed." That's why. So my question for you is, what is it, my loves? What is it in your life that you might have unconsciously placed on your altar? What is it that has held meaning for you that might be ready to be swapped out for something more true, more loving, more life-affirming. And I get that this may take some courage and some faith, and you can do it. You can do it. This month is all about, our theme is let go and let God. So this month of October, when the leaves are changing and they're beginning to fall, what is it that you are ready to let go of, that you are ready to take off that altar that you have been unconsciously worshiping? What is that for you? And what are you going to embrace instead? Letitia James, the current Attorney General of the state of New York, a woman of deep conviction and courage, recently said, "I am a proud woman of faith, and I know that faith and fear cannot share the same space. And so today, I'm not fearful, I'm fearless." This is that. Fear and faith cannot share the same space. And yesterday, we were fearless. And we felt it. We felt the power and the weight of that. So can you step into fearlessness in your own life so that you can make the necessary changes that your soul, honey, I'm telling you, your soul is calling for you. And I'm not talking about, I mentioned this last week, I am not talking about superficial changes, the whole self-help nonsense. That is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about deep generational healing. I'm talking about deeply looking at what you've placed on the altar of your life and where might an adjustment support you in your spiritual evolution, your spiritual growth as a spiritual being. So this week, I invite you to remember the parts of you that may have been tucked away or forgotten or silenced. I invite you to consider, if you were to march for yourself, what is it that you would be marching for? If you were going to march for yourself, what is it that you would be marching for? And finally, I invite you to remember that you are profoundly and deeply and forever loved exactly as you are in this moment, this breath.